What happens if consciousness falls into black hole? In Buddhism, consciousness is not considered a permanent or unchanging entity, but rather a process that arises and ceases based on conditions. Therefore, from a Buddhist perspective, the idea of consciousness falling into or being trapped by a black hole would be viewed metaphorically rather than literally. What you think is this concept only limits in metaphoric view. What could be the scientific view to understand this ideology? Leave a comment below. Here, I'm going to put some interpretation based on some research. Metaphorical interpretation. If we consider a black hole as a metaphor for the powerful forces of desire, ignorance, and attachment that bind beings to the cycle of suffering, samsara, then falling into a black hole could symbolize consciousness becoming overwhelmed by these forces. This could lead to deeper entanglement in the cycles of birth, death, and rebirth, where one remains trapped in suffering. In this sense, if consciousness were to fall into a black hole, it would be akin to being caught in the grip of powerful delusions or cravings, leading to a greater cycle of suffering and confusion. The path of Buddhist practice aims to avoid this by cultivating wisdom, ethical conduct, and mindfulness, which together lead to liberation from these cyclical forces. Scientific perspective with Buddhist interpretation. If we were to consider the concept of a black hole from a scientific perspective, where it is a region in space with such strong gravitational forces that nothing, not even light, can escape, applying this to consciousness can be more speculative and philosophical. Physical consciousness. If consciousness is understood purely in physical terms, as an emergent property of brain activity, and if somehow that brain were to be near a black hole, it would likely be destroyed by the extreme gravitational forces before even crossing the event horizon. In this view, consciousness would cease as the physical brain is destroyed. Buddhist view of impermanence. Buddhism teaches that consciousness is impermanent and dependent on causes and conditions. So, whether in a black hole or elsewhere, consciousness would arise and cease in accordance with the conditions present. If consciousness were to fall into a black hole, it would not imply a permanent state of entrapment or destruction, but rather a continuation of the impermanent process of consciousness, arising and ceasing according to conditions. In the extreme environment of a black hole, where physical and temporal conditions are drastically altered, consciousness as we know it, dependent on a functioning brain, would not persist. From a Buddhist perspective, the idea of consciousness falling into a black hole is best understood metaphorically. It symbolizes the danger of becoming entangled in delusion and suffering, leading to deeper cycles of rebirth and sorrow. In the literal, scientific sense, if consciousness is tied to the physical brain, it would cease as the brain is destroyed by the forces of the black hole. However, Buddhism ultimately teaches that consciousness is not a permanent, unchanging entity, and it ceases and arises based on conditions, meaning that in any extreme condition, such as near a black hole, consciousness would not have a fixed or enduring existence. At the end, you might have your own idea to interpret this ideology based on your knowledge or on some research experiences. Let's share one another's view on comment that we know how people interpret this concept. Until this, stay happy, stay peace, and stay tuned.